Alright, so we've done this for Sopranos characters and Better Call Saul characters. Now we're throwing Walt into the Dexter universe to see how he'd do. And this is interesting because Dexter's World has a completely different kind of criminal than Breaking Bad. In Breaking Bad, most people are either civilians getting pulled into crime or career criminals who operate on greed and fear. In Dexter, you've got serial killers, detectives who've seen everything, and people who are really good at reading others because their survival depends on it. Walt's manipulation works by exploiting emotional vulnerabilities: guilt, fear, ego, love. But what happens when he's dealing with people who are either emotionally controlled or who've built their entire lives around hiding their true nature? Dexter Morgan can't manipulate him. Walt would lose against Dexter, and it wouldn't even be close. Dexter's entire existence is built around reading people and mimicking normal human behavior while hiding what he really is. Dexter can spot manipulation because he's been doing it his entire life. He knows all the techniques because he uses them himself. Walt's manipulation style requires emotional buy-in. He needs people to care about him, to feel sympathy for him, to want to believe his justifications. Dexter doesn't emotionally connect with people in that way. He performs emotions, but he doesn't actually feel them in the way Walt needs him to. The moment Walt starts with his rationalizations and his "I'm doing this for my family" routine, Dexter would recognize it as performance, because that's what Dexter does. He performs being a good guy while doing terrible things. He'd see Walt's doing the same thing and immediately understand what Walt actually is. Walt's ego would also be a massive tell for Dexter. Dexter spent his whole life around killers and criminals, and he can spot the ones who are driven by ego versus necessity. Walt's need to be recognized as smart and powerful would make him transparent to Dexter. And here's the thing, Walt needs leverage to manipulate people. With Jesse, it's approval. With Skyler, it's fear. With Hank, it's family loyalty. What leverage does Walt have over Dexter? Dexter doesn't care about money, doesn't need validation, doesn't have the emotional vulnerabilities Walt usually exploits. If anything, Dexter would manipulate Walt by letting Walt think he's in control. Dexter's really good at playing the harmless forensics nerd while actually being 3 steps ahead of everyone. Walt would probably underestimate Dexter completely, and that would be a fatal mistake. So no, Walt can't manipulate Dexter, and if Walt ended up on Dexter's radar as a threat, Walt would probably end up wrapped in plastic. Deborah Morgan can manipulate her, but not long term. Deborah's someone Walt could absolutely manipulate, at least initially. Deb wears her heart on her sleeve. She's emotionally reactive, she's got this savior complex, she's drawn to people who need help. Those are all vulnerabilities Walt knows how to exploit. Walt would come at Deb with the family man under pressure routine. "I'm just trying to provide for my wife and kids before I die of cancer." That would hit Deb hard because she's got strong feelings about family and protecting people who can't protect themselves. Walt would also play up being overwhelmed and scared, which would trigger Deb's protective instincts. She'd probably try to help him, try to find him resources or legal protection or whatever, and Walt would use that help while secretly continuing to do whatever he wanted. But here's where this falls apart. Deb's got really good instincts, and once she senses betrayal or realizes someone's played her, she flips fast. She goes from protective to aggressive immediately. The moment Deb caught Walt in a lie or realized he was manipulating her, she'd turn on him hard. And Deb as an enemy is way more dangerous than Deb as an ally. She's a detective with resources and she doesn't let things go. So Walt could manipulate Deb once, maybe get her to cover for him, or give him information, or look the other way on something. But long-term manipulation wouldn't work because Deb's not stupid and she doesn't stay fooled once she figures out what's happening. James Doakes absolutely can't manipulate him. Doakes would be Walt's worst nightmare because Doakes smells bullshit instinctively. Doakes has this sixth sense for when people are lying or hiding something. He's suspicious by nature and he trusts his gut. And Walt's entire act, the mild-mannered teacher routine, the humble victim performance, would set off every alarm in Doakes' head. Walt's manipulation, Rita Bennett, can manipulate her easily. Rita is exactly Walt's type of target, and that's sad because Rita's a genuinely good person. Rita's trusting, she's conflict avoidant, she's drawn to damaged men who she thinks she can help fix. She's been in abusive relationships before and she still gives people chances. All of that makes her incredibly vulnerable to someone like Walt. Walt would approach Rita the same way he approaches everyone early in Breaking Bad. Humble, scared, just trying to do his best for his family. "I've got cancer, I'm trying to provide for my kids, I'm overwhelmed and don't know what I'm doing." Rita would absolutely respond to that. She'd want to help, want to support him, want to believe he's a good person in a bad situation, and Walt would use that sympathy to get whatever he needed from her. Rita also wouldn't push back or ask hard questions the way someone like Deb would. She'd accept Walt's explanations because she wants to believe people are good, and by the time Rita realized something was wrong, Walt would already have her so emotionally invested that extracting herself would be difficult. The manipulation would be easy and effective. Rita represents the kind of person Walt succeeds with, someone kind who gives people chances and doesn't expect the worst from them. Angel Batista can manipulate him. Angel's another person Walt would have success with because Angel's emotionally driven and wants to believe in people. Angel's a good cop and a good person, but those qualities can be vulnerabilities when dealing with manipulators. Angel gives people second chances, he believes in redemption, he thinks most people are trying their best. Walt would be polite and cooperative with Angel, he'd show appropriate regret if caught doing something wrong. He'd have explanations ready that sound reasonable, and Angel would give him the benefit of the doubt again and again. Walt's really good at reading what authority figures want to hear and giving them exactly that. Angel wants to believe people can change and improve, so Walt would perform exactly that, the guy who made mistakes but is trying to do better. This manipulation would work consistently with Angel because Angel's not naturally suspicious the way Doakes is. Angel approaches people with an open mind and assumes good intentions until proven otherwise. Walt exploits that openness ruthlessly. The only way this manipulation fails is if someone Angel trusts, like Deb or Dexter, tells him directly that Walt's dangerous. Even then, Angel would probably try to find the good in Walt before completely writing him off. Maria Laguerta. Mostly can't manipulate her. Laguerta's an interesting case because she's got some vulnerabilities Walt could exploit, but she's also got defenses that would make sustained manipulation difficult. Laguerta's ambitious and political. She cares about her career and her reputation. Walt could potentially appeal to those interests, position himself as someone who could help her career or make her look good. Short-term flattery might work with Laguerta. Walt could stroke her ego, make her feel important and respected, use that to get what he needs in the moment. But long-term manipulation would fail because Laguerta's got her own ego and her own agenda. The moment Walt tried to subtly dominate or outmaneuver her, she'd recognize it as a power play and push back. Laguerta's dealt with office politics and ambitious people trying to use her for years. She's not naive about manipulation. She might play along if she thinks it benefits her, but she wouldn't actually be fooled. And if Walt ever became a liability to Laguerta's career or reputation, she'd turn on him immediately. Her loyalty is to herself first, which means Walt couldn't count on her the way he counts on people who have emotional attachments to him. So Walt might get some short-term cooperation from Laguerta through flattery and strategic positioning, but he couldn't manipulate her the way he manipulates Jesse or Skylar because she's too self-interested and too experienced with political maneuvering. Hannah McKay. Absolutely can't manipulate her. Hannah would be one of the worst possible matchups for Walt because she's got none of the vulnerabilities Walt typically exploits. Hannah's calm, patient, comfortable with violence, and emotionally self-contained. She doesn't need validation from anyone. She doesn't feel guilt about who she is. She's not looking for father figures or moral justification. Walt's entire manipulation playbook wouldn't work on Hannah. The victim routine, Hannah wouldn't care. The family man justification, Hannah would see through it immediately. The intellectual superiority act, Hannah would be completely unimpressed. Hannah's killed multiple people and she's not conflicted about it. She doesn't have the moral struggles that make people like Jesse vulnerable. She's made peace with who she is in ways Walt never has. Plus, Hannah's a survivor with great instincts. She can read when people are dangerous or unstable, and Walt is both. Hannah would clock Walt as an ego-driven liability within the first conversation. Hannah doesn't need anything from Walt. She's not looking for money or protection or approval, and without being able to offer her something she needs, Walt has no leverage. If anything, Hannah would probably see Walt as more trouble than he's worth and either avoid him completely or, if he became a problem, handle him the way she handles all her problems, quietly and permanently. Harry Morgan can't manipulate him. Even though Harry's dead in the show and only appears as Dexter's conscience, if we're talking about Harry when he was alive, Walt couldn't manipulate him. Harry spent years as a homicide detective. He's seen every kind of criminal, every kind of justification, every kind of manipulation. Walt's techniques wouldn't be new or impressive to Harry. Harry also built an entire moral framework around controlling a killer. He created the code specifically to channel Dexter's urges in a controlled way. Someone like Harry who can do that kind of long-term psychological work wouldn't fall for Walt's short-term emotional manipulation. Walt's self-pity and his "I had no choice" routine wouldn't land with Harry. Harry's dealt with criminals who had way more legitimate reasons for what they did than Walt has. Cancer and medical bills isn't going to move someone who's spent decades in homicide. Harry would see Walt as undisciplined, reckless, and dangerous to innocent people. Those qualities would make Walt someone Harry would want to see caught and stopped, not someone Harry would help or protect. Walt would have no leverage over Harry and no emotional vulnerabilities to exploit. Harry's motivations are completely different from the people Walt usually manipulates. Brian Moser can't manipulate him, would get counter-manipulated. Brian, Dexter's biological brother, would be a disaster for Walt because Brian would pretend to be manipulated just to study Walt, then flip the script. Brian's a serial killer who thrives on psychological games. He's smart, he's patient, and he enjoys playing with people. Walt would think he's manipulating Brian, but really, Brian would be 3 steps ahead analyzing Walt's techniques. The fundamental difference between Brian and Walt is that Brian's comfortable with what he is. He doesn't need justification or moral rationalization. He kills because he wants to, and he's fine with that. Walt needs to believe he's the good guy doing bad things for good reasons. That self-deception is a weakness Brian would exploit immediately. Brian would encourage Walt's rationalizations while privately laughing at them. Brian would probably find Walt fascinating as a case study. Here's this guy with obvious ego and control issues trying to pretend he's a noble family man. Brian would want to see how far he could push Walt, what it would take to make Walt admit what he really is. And if Brian got bored or if Walt became inconvenient, Brian would just kill him. Brian doesn't have the same restraint Dexter has. He's not following Harry's code. He does what he wants when he wants. So Walt not only couldn't manipulate Brian, he'd be actively manipulated by Brian while thinking he was in control. That's the worst possible outcome for someone like Walt, whose ego depends on being the smartest person in the room. Looking at all these matchups, Walt succeeds with people who are emotionally open, trusting, and want to believe in people's good intentions. Rita, Angel, and initially Deb all fall into that category, but Walt fails against anyone who's self-aware, emotionally controlled, or comfortable with their own darkness. Dexter, Doakes, Hannah, Brian, they're all people who either see through manipulation because they do it themselves, or who don't have the emotional vulnerabilities Walt exploits. What this shows is that Walt's manipulation is contextual. He's really good at exploiting normal people's emotions and moral frameworks, but when he's up against people who are either professional liars themselves or who don't operate on normal emotional patterns, his techniques don't work. The Dexter universe has way more people in that second category than Breaking Bad does. Miami Metro is full of detectives who've seen every kind of criminal behavior, and the criminals in Dexter are often serial killers who are psychologically different from regular people. Walt thrives in Breaking Bad partly because most people around him are relatively normal. They've got normal emotional responses and normal moral frameworks, but drop him into Dexter's world and suddenly he's surrounded by people who are either hunting monsters or are monsters themselves, and in that environment, Walt's just not as effective. If you want the honest answer about what would happen if Walt ended up in Miami, he'd probably get caught pretty fast. Either Doakes would be on him immediately, or Dexter would clock him as a dangerous killer and handle him, or he'd try to manipulate the wrong person and end up dead. Walt's good at what he does, but the Dexter universe is playing a different game than Breaking Bad, and Walt's not prepared for that game. Let me know in the comments who you think would win in a direct confrontation between Walt and Dexter. That's a whole other question, but it's a fun one to think about.